The Tuscan dawn broke cold and gray, mist clinging to the olive grove like old ghosts. Thomas Whitmore stood barefoot on dew-soaked grass, his breath visible in the September air, staring at the two golden eyes emerging from the fog. The cheetah was massive, emaciated, half its face scarred and one eye milky white. It limped forward, dragging something small and limp between its paws, a cub, barely breathing, ribs showing through spotted fur. Tom's hands trembled, not from fear, from recognition. The cheetah pushed the dying cub toward him with its nose, then sat back on haunches, waiting, trusting. Tom's throat tightened. "Those eyes," he whispered. The scarred cheetah extended its left foreleg. Tom saw the surgical scar running down the leg, his own stitching pattern. Unmistakable. "My God," he breathed. "The last time I saw you, I was 4,000 miles away and 12 years younger." The cheetah didn't move. It had crossed a continent to find him. "Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story." Dr. Thomas Whitmore was 67 years old and had stopped living 3 years ago. He simply hadn't noticed yet. Every morning followed the same script. Wake at dawn. Make coffee he barely tasted. Stare at the olive grove his wife had loved. Return to the empty stone farmhouse that echoed with conversations that would never happen again. The neighbors in San Casciano called him Il Solitario Americano, the lonely American. They weren't wrong. Tom had been a veterinarian once, one of the best. 20 years in Kenya, working with the Wildlife Service, treating everything from elephant calves to injured cheetahs. He'd saved hundreds of animals, performed surgeries in the bush with equipment held together by wire and prayer. His hands had been steady then, his purpose clear. Then he'd moved to Tuscany 5 years ago, purchasing this crumbling farmhouse surrounded by sunflower fields and ancient olive trees. It had been Ellie's dream. His wife had wanted to retire here, paint watercolors, grow tomatoes, watch sunsets over the Tuscan hills. They'd planned it for years. She'd lived here exactly 14 months before the cancer took her. Tom stayed because leaving felt like abandoning her twice. Her ashes rested beneath the oldest olive tree, the one with branches that stretched toward the morning sun like arthritic fingers. He talked to her there sometimes, though the conversations were becoming harder to remember. But Ellie wasn't his only ghost. 20 years before her death, their son Daniel had died at 8 years old, congenital heart failure, 3 surgeries, countless hospital visits, and one final night when Tom had held his boy's hand and felt the pulse stop. The hospital had given Daniel a medal afterward, Bravest Heart, from Memorial Children's Hospital. Tom had buried it with Ellie's ashes because he couldn't bear to look at it anymore. The guilt was a living thing inside him. He'd saved hundreds of animals but couldn't save his own son. What kind of doctor was he? What kind of father? So Tom existed. He woke. He moved through rooms. He went through motions. His veterinary kit sat in the barn, gathering dust. His old textbooks remained boxed. His phone rarely rang. He'd become a man-shaped absence, waiting without knowing what he was waiting for. Until this morning, when 2 golden eyes emerged from the fog, carrying an impossible recognition and a dying cub that needed him to remember who he'd been. Tom woke to the sound of something scratching at his front door. Not the tentative scratch of a cat or the frantic pawing of a lost dog. This was deliberate, patient, heavy. He sat up in bed, heart hammering, and checked the clock, 6:47 a.m. The scratching came again, accompanied by a low sound, not quite a growl, more like a rumble of urgency. Tom pulled on his robe and moved downstairs, muscle memory guiding him to the gun cabinet. The shotgun was where it had always been, unloaded since Ellie had made him promise years ago. "You don't need that thing loaded in the house, Tom. What are you afraid of?" He grabbed it anyway, the weight familiar and cold in his hands. Didn't load it. Habit. The scratching stopped as he approached the door. Tom opened it slowly. The cheetah stood 3 feet away, massive even in its emaciated state. Tom had worked with enough big cats to recognize the signs immediately: dehydration, starvation, exhaustion. Its left ear was torn, badly healed. Its right eye was milky with old trauma. Half blind, ribs showed through its spotted coat. At its feet lay a cub. So still, Tom thought it was already dead. Then he saw the shallow rise and fall of its tiny chest. The adult cheetah male, Tom noted automatically, made no aggressive move. It simply pushed the cub forward with its nose, then sat back on its haunches. Its one good eye fixed on Tom with an intensity that made his throat tighten. "Easy," Tom whispered, setting the shotgun against the doorframe. "Easy now." He knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. The cheetah watched, but didn't retreat. Tom reached toward the cub, half expecting the adult to lunge. It didn't. Instead, it pushed the small body closer, as if to say, "Please." The cub was female, maybe 8 weeks old, barely 5 pounds. Her ribs were skeletal ridges beneath dappled fur. But what caught Tom's attention was her throat distended, swollen on one side. Something was lodged in there, blocking her airway. "She's choking on something," Tom said, more to himself than the cheetah. "She needs surgery or she'll die within hours." He looked up at the adult male. The cheetah made no sound. Tom noticed then no ear flick in response to his voice. Either the animal was in shock or... "You can't hear me, can you?" The cheetah remained motionless, but something in its posture, in the way its one good eye tracked Tom's hands rather than his mouth, confirmed the suspicion. Deaf, probably from trauma or infection. Tom's gaze dropped to the cheetah's extended left foreleg, and his blood went cold. There, running down the inside of the leg, was a scar. A surgical scar. Old, faded, but unmistakable in its pattern, the 3-point stitch Tom had used in field emergencies. Designed to minimize tissue damage and maximize flexibility. He'd developed that technique himself. Used it exclusively for 12 years in Kenya. Tom's hands froze. "Let me see that leg." The cheetah, as if understanding the gesture rather than the words, extended its foreleg further. Tom touched the scar with trembling fingers. The pattern was exact. The placement identical to a surgery he'd performed once, in a makeshift clinic outside Mombasa, on a young cheetah cub caught in a poacher's steel trap. That had been 2013, 12 years ago, 4,000 miles away. Tom's mind raced through impossibilities. Cheetahs lived 8 to 12 years in the wild. This one was at least 12. The cub he'd saved had been maybe 4 months old. This would be the right age. But cheetahs had territories. They didn't migrate continents. They certainly didn't remember individual humans after more than a decade. And yet, the memory hit him like a physical blow. A young cheetah, terrified and bleeding, lying on a field table while Tom worked by flashlight to remove the trap's metal teeth from shattered bone. The cub's mother had been killed by poachers. Tom had saved its leg, rehabilitated it for 6 weeks, then released it back into the Masai Mara. He'd never expected to see it again. "You crossed a continent to find me." Tom's voice cracked. "That's impossible." The cheetah didn't move, just kept pushing the dying cub toward him. Tom reached out slowly and touched the old scar again. This time, the cheetah leaned into the touch, a gesture of recognition, of trust earned 12 years ago and somehow, impossibly, remembered. Tom made his decision. "All right, old friend," he said, scooping the cub into his arms. Her body was hot with fever, her breathing labored. "Let's save your daughter." The cheetah rose and followed him inside without hesitation, as if it had always known this was where the journey would end. Tom cleared his kitchen table with one sweep of his arm, sending newspapers and coffee cups clattering to the floor. He laid the cub down gently on a clean towel, then moved with practiced efficiency to the barn where his old veterinary kit waited in dusty exile. His hands knew the way, even if his heart had forgotten. He returned with the kit, a portable oxygen concentrator, and a box of supplies he'd kept just in case, but never expected to use again. The adult cheetah stood in the kitchen doorway, watching. Tom could feel the weight of that gaze, the trust implicit in every moment the animal didn't attack. "I'm calling you the Silent One," Tom said, setting up his equipment. "Since you can't tell me your real name." The cub's breathing was shallow, rattling. Tom checked her vitals, heart rate elevated, temperature 104 degrees, severe dehydration. But the immediate threat was the obstruction in her throat. He could see it now with better light, a distinct bulge on the left side of her neck, just below the jaw. "You're not sick, little one," Tom murmured, palpating the area gently. The cub whimpered. "Something's stuck in there. Let's call you Ember, for those dying fire eyes of yours." He ran the calculations in his head. Odds of survival without intervention, 0. With emergency extraction, maybe 30%. The object was lodged deep, partially blocking her airway. She was getting enough oxygen to survive, but not enough to thrive. Without removal, she'd die of starvation or infection within 24 hours. Tom hadn't performed surgery since his hands started shaking. Since he'd stood in a hospital room 20 years ago, watching surgeons work on Daniel's failing heart, knowing his medical knowledge was useless against congenital defects and God's terrible timing. The tremor got worse. Tom gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady himself. He'd saved hundreds of animals. He'd worked in impossible conditions with inadequate tools. Why couldn't he make his hands stop shaking? The Silent One stepped closer. Tom didn't notice at first. Lost in the spiral of memory, Daniel's small body on the operating table, monitors beeping their countdown, Ellie's hand crushing his as they watched their son slip away despite every intervention modern medicine could offer. Then he felt weight against his thigh. The Silent One had moved beside him and placed his head on Tom's leg, the exact gesture the young cheetah had made 12 years ago in Kenya after Tom had saved his leg, a gesture of trust and comfort that transcended species. Tom looked down into the cheetah's one good eye and saw something that steadied him: recognition. Not of a doctor or a savior, but of someone who understood what it meant to fight for those you loved, even when the odds were impossible. "All right," Tom whispered. "One more time. For both of you." His hands stopped shaking. Tom worked with the focused intensity of his younger self, setting up an improvised endoscopic procedure using a modified otoscope and narrow forceps. He couldn't put Ember under full anesthesia, she was too weak. Local sedation would have to do. He administered the injection carefully, waited for her tiny body to relax, then began. The obstruction was deeper than he'd thought. Tom worked millimeter by millimeter, using the light from the otoscope to navigate the narrow passage. His back ached from bending over the table. Sweat dripped into his eyes. The Silent One never moved from his position, a warm presence of solidarity. Ember's breathing grew more labored. Her oxygen saturation started dropping. "Come on, little one. Stay with me." The numbers fell further. Her chest movements became erratic. Tom extracted the forceps, cleared her airway manually, and began compressions on her tiny rib cage, 2 fingers, gentle but firm, counting the rhythm he'd learned decades ago. The same rhythm he'd used on Daniel in those final moments when the monitors flatlined and Ellie screamed and he'd known, absolutely known. It was over but couldn't stop trying. Except this time, Ember gasped. Her chest heaved, and she sucked in air with a rattling sound that was the most beautiful thing Tom had heard in years. "That's it. Breathe. Breathe." He returned to the extraction, working faster now. The object was close. He could feel it with the forceps. One more adjustment, a careful twist, and it came free. Tom pulled out a small, tarnished disc of metal, dark with biological matter. He set it aside and checked Ember's airway clear. Her breathing immediately smoothed out, deepened. Color returned to her gums. She was going to live. Tom slumped against the table, exhausted, and reached for the extracted object to clean it and identify what had nearly killed her. He rinsed it under the tap. The water ran clear, and Tom's world stopped. There in his palm was a small medal, tarnished silver, roughly circular, with an engraving he knew by heart because he'd traced it with his fingers 1,000 times before burying it. "For Daniel Whitmore. You fought like a lion. Memorial Children's Hospital, 2005. Tom's knees buckled. He caught himself on the counter, staring at the impossible object in his hand. He'd buried this medal 3 years ago, wrapped in cloth, placed carefully beneath the olive tree where Ellie's ashes rested. He'd said goodbye to it, to Daniel, to the part of himself that believed in miracles. How the Silent One approached and touched his nose to Tom's face, gentle as a whisper. Tom collapsed to the floor, clutching the medal, and wept the first real tears since Ellie's funeral. Great, heaving sobs that came from a place deeper than grief, from the bedrock of loss he'd built his life upon. "You brought him back to me," he choked out, looking at the Silent One through blurred vision. "Somehow, you brought my son back to me." The Cheetah settled beside him, patient and present, while Tom held his son's medal and his son's killer in the same shaking hands, and finally let himself feel everything he'd been holding back for 3 years. Day 1, September 15th, afternoon. Tom converted his bedroom into a recovery ward. Ember was too weak to be left alone, and cheetahs needed warmth. Their bodies weren't built for the cooling Tuscan autumn. He brought in a space heater, set up heating pads wrapped in towels, and positioned his reading chair beside the bed where the cub lay. The Silent One refused to leave. He settled at the foot of the bed, his body a living barrier between his daughter and the door, and watched everything Tom did with vigilant attention. "You don't trust easily, do you?" Tom said, preparing a mixture of goat milk and electrolyte solution. "Can't say I blame you." He filled an eyedropper and approached Ember carefully. The cub was barely conscious, her tiny head lolling. Tom supported her with one hand and squeezed drops of formula into the corner of her mouth. She swallowed reflexively. Then again. "Good girl. Just a little at a time." The process took an hour, patient, methodical, a few drops at a time so she wouldn't aspirate. Tom's back ached from bending over. His knees protested when he finally stood. He was 67 years old and felt every year of it, but his hands were steady. The Silent One watched the entire feeding, then did something that caught Tom off guard. The cheetah rose, approached Tom, and gently headbutted his leg, a gesture of approval, of gratitude. Tom rested his hand on the scarred head. "We'll get her through this, I promise." That night, Tom slept in the reading chair. Every 2 hours he woke to feed Ember, check her temperature, monitor her breathing. The Silent One never slept, or if he did, it was so lightly that any movement from Tom brought his head up, alert. Around 3 a.m., exhausted and aching, Tom began talking, not to himself, to them. "I had a son once," he said quietly, feeding Ember another dropper of formula. "Daniel. He would have been 28 this year. He loved animals, especially big cats. Used to make me tell him stories about the lions in Kenya every night before bed." The Silent One's ears swiveled toward him, tracking the vibrations of Tom's voice through the floorboards. "He was sick from the day he was born. Heart defect. We knew from the beginning we wouldn't have him long. But you always think, you always believe there'll be more time. One more birthday. One more Christmas. One more story." Ember swallowed. Her eyes still closed, but her breathing stronger. "He died when he was 8. Ellie and I tried to keep going. But something broke in us. We stayed together, but we were both just existing. Then Ellie got sick too. Cancer. Fast and mean." Tom set down the dropper and picked up Daniel's medal from where he'd placed it on the nightstand. The engraving caught the lamplight. "I buried this with her ashes because I couldn't look at it anymore. It reminded me of everything I couldn't save, every failure, every moment I stood by helpless while someone I loved slipped away." He looked at the Silent One. "But you found it. Somehow that flood last spring must have washed it up, and your daughter swallowed it, and you brought her to the one person who could get it out." Tom's voice cracked. "I don't believe in miracles. I'm a doctor. I believe in science and probability and the fact that life is random and cruel. But you crossed 4,000 miles to find me. You remembered me after 12 years. You trusted me with the most precious thing in your world. He leaned back in the chair, exhausted. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something else at work here. Maybe Ellie sent you. Or Daniel. Or maybe you're just a stubborn animal who remembered one kind act and bet everything on it. The Silent One settled his head back down, but kept his one good eye on Tom. Either way, Tom whispered, thank you for reminding me what it feels like to matter. Day 2, September 16th. Ember's improvement was remarkable. By morning, she was alert enough to protest the feedings, squirming in Tom's hands. Her temperature had dropped to near normal. She even tried to stand, wobbling on unsteady legs before collapsing back onto the towels. Easy, little one. You're not ready for marathons yet. Tom spent the day monitoring her, feeding her every 3 hours, cleaning her, keeping her warm. The Silent One barely moved, but Tom noticed the tension leaving the cheetah's body as Ember grew stronger. By evening, father and daughter were curled together, Ember tucked against the Silent One's chest, his chin resting protectively over her. It was the first time Tom had seen the Silent One relax. That night, Tom realized he was out of supplies. The goat milk wouldn't last beyond tomorrow. Ember needed proper formula, antibiotics to prevent infection from the throat trauma, and medical-grade heating equipment if she was going to fully recover, which meant going to the village, which meant people, which meant questions. Tom hadn't spoken to anyone in San Casciano beyond basic transactions in 3 years. Day 3, September 17th. The drive to San Casciano took 20 minutes through winding Tuscan hills. Tom parked near the village square, grabbed his supply list, and headed for the pharmacy. He felt the stares immediately. Small villages survived on gossip, and Tom had given them plenty to talk about over the years. The strange American who lived alone, who didn't attend church, who spent hours talking to a grave under an olive tree. But this was different. These stares were sharper, urgent. Tom pushed open the pharmacy door and found Maria Rossi, the pharmacist, already shaking her head. Dr. Whitmore, you cannot— I need antibiotics, Tom interrupted. Amoxicillin if you have it, and electrolyte formula suitable for infant animals. Also disposable syringes, and the whole village knows. Maria kept her voice low but firm. Marco Bellini saw them, the wild beasts at your house. He's been telling everyone you're harboring dangerous animals. Tom set his list on the counter. They're cheetahs, and they're not dangerous to anyone. Cheetahs. Maria's eyes widened. Dio mio. Thomas. Cheetahs are not house pets. They're predators. They're also dying without medical care. Will you help me or not? Before Maria could answer, the pharmacy door slammed open. Marco Bellini filled the doorway 62, barrel-chested, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life working Tuscan soil and had strong opinions about the proper order of things. Absolutely not, Marco's voice boomed through the small pharmacy. Maria, you give him nothing. Those creatures are a danger to this entire village. Tom turned slowly. Marco, they're injured and recovering. They pose no threat. No threat. They're wild animals killers. Marco stepped closer, his face reddening. You bring danger to our children, our families. For what your American sentimentality? They're living beings who need help. Then call the authorities. Let them deal with it properly. You have no right to keep dangerous wildlife in your home. Tom felt the old anger rising, the rage he'd buried under grief. The fury at a world that took everything good and left only emptiness. I have every right. They came to me. The cub was dying. Would you have me turn them away? Yes, Marco shouted. Better one animal dies than risk human lives. The only killer I see is ignorance. The pharmacy went silent. Maria looked stricken. Marco's face turned purple. How dare you? Enough. The voice came from the doorway. Father Giuseppe Martinelli, 74 years old and the moral center of San Casciano for the past 40 years. stepped into the pharmacy with the quiet authority of someone who'd mediated every village conflict since Marco was a boy. "Marco," Father Giuseppe said calmly, "you will lower your voice in Maria's place of business." Marco sputtered. "Father, you cannot possibly support I support decency." The priest turned to Tom, his weathered face gentle but firm. "Dr. Whitmore, these animals, they're truly injured. The cub nearly died. I performed emergency surgery yesterday. And the adult, watching over his daughter. He's deaf, partially blind, and wouldn't survive a day in captivity. He needs a few more days. Then I'll contact the proper wildlife authorities." Father Giuseppe nodded slowly, then turned to Marco. "You lost your wife 5 years ago, Marco. You buried your grandson 2 years ago. You know what grief looks like." Marco's anger faltered. "What does that have to? This man buried his wife under an olive tree, lost his son before that. And you deny him the peace of helping something that still has a chance to live." Giuseppe's voice was soft but cut deep. "What has this village become when we show more compassion to our grievances than to our neighbors?" Marco opened his mouth, closed it, looked between Tom and the priest. Finally he spoke, quieter now but no less firm. "If those beasts hurt anyone, I will call the authorities myself, and I'll make sure you're held responsible." He stormed out. The silence in the pharmacy felt heavy. Maria began gathering supplies without a word, her hands shaking slightly. When she rang up the total, she reduced it by half. "For the animals," she said quietly. "Not for you." Father Giuseppe walked Tom to his truck, helped him load the supplies. "Marco's not wrong to be cautious," the priest said. "But neither are you for showing mercy. Just be careful, Thomas. The law is not always kind to those who help outside its boundaries." Tom nodded, throat tight. "Thank you, Father." "Don't thank me. Just heal them, and then let them go." Giuseppe's old eyes held wisdom and warning. The hardest part of love is knowing when to open the door. Day 4-5, September 18th, 19th. Tom worked against an invisible clock now. Marco's threat hung over everything. He had days, maybe a week, before someone made an official report. Ember needed to be strong enough to travel. The silent one needed to be stable enough to survive a release. And Tom needed to figure out where on earth he could take 2 cheetahs that wouldn't end with them in cages. But something unexpected was happening. Ember was thriving. By day 4, she was walking steadily, even attempting small pounces on Tom's shoelaces. The silent one had started eating again, raw chicken Tom bought from the butcher, who asked no questions and accepted extra payment for discretion. And Tom was laughing. Actually laughing. For the first time since Ellie died, Ember had discovered Tom's collection of wine corks and decided they were the greatest toys ever invented. She batted them across the kitchen floor, chased them under furniture, ambushed them from behind chairs. The silent one watched his daughter's antics with what Tom could only describe as parental exasperation. "Yes, she's ridiculous," Tom told the cheetah. "She gets it from you." He started cooking again real meals, not just reheated leftovers. Started opening windows to let in light. Started noticing the beauty of the Tuscan autumn instead of just enduring it. One evening, he carried a chair out to Ellie's grave under the olive tree. Ember followed, tumbling through the grass, while the silent one maintained his vigilant distance. Tom held Daniel's medal and spoke to the photograph he'd brought out. "I know what you're doing, Ellie, sending them here, making me feel things again. It's working." Ember attacked his shoelaces. Tom gently moved her aside. "I don't know how long I have with them. Days, probably. But you were right about something. You were always right. You told me once that the only way to honor Daniel was to keep living, keep helping, keep finding reasons to matter." He watched Ember play, watched the silent one watch her with fierce protective love. "I think I'm starting to understand." Day 6, September 20th. Ember was 6 days post-surgery and moving like a healthy cub. She'd gained almost 2 pounds. Her coat had regained its luster. She was eating solid food, small pieces of raw meat that the Silent One would carefully tear apart for her. But Tom noticed the Silent One growing restless. The cheetah spent hours staring out windows, his body tense with awareness of something Tom couldn't perceive. He paced at night, refused to settle. Tom researched wildlife release protocols, contacted old colleagues in Kenya, and realized the impossible truth: Ember was too young to survive in the wild, too old to be placed in a traditional sanctuary. And the Silent One would never accept captivity. They needed time, months, probably, for Ember to learn hunting skills, gain size and strength, for Tom to arrange proper placement. But Marco's deadline was measured in days. That night, Tom sat with both cheetahs and made his decision. I won't let them take you. I won't let them put you in cages. Your father crossed an ocean to find me, and I won't betray that trust. The Silent One settled beside Tom's chair and, for the first time since arriving, allowed Tom to stroke his scarred head. We'll find a way. I promise. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the Tuscan hills. Inside, 3 beings, 2 animal, 1 human created the beginning of something that looked like family. September 23rd, evening. Tom had been preparing for the release at dawn. He'd spent the day studying maps of the Tuscan countryside, identifying wildlife corridors that led to protected forests near the Apennine Mountains. It wasn't ideal. Cheetahs weren't native to Italy, but it was the best option he had. A temporary solution while he arranged transport back to Africa through proper channels. Ember was sleeping in her usual spot, curled in a nest of blankets near the fireplace. The Silent One had been agitated all evening, pacing between windows, his one good eye scanning the darkness beyond the glass. Easy, friend, Tom said, checking his supplies one more time. Tomorrow we move. I know it's not home, but it's safe. No cages. No. The gunshot cracked through the night air. Tom froze. The Silent One's head snapped toward the sound, his body going rigid. Another shot. Closer this time. Then voices, men shouting in Italian, excitement and frustration mingling. Tom grabbed his binoculars and moved to the window. The sounds were coming from the restricted forest zone about half a mile northland that belonged to a nature preserve where hunting was strictly prohibited. Through the binoculars, he could see lights, flashlight beams cutting through trees. 3, maybe 4 of them. Tom adjusted focus and his stomach dropped. Men with rifles, moving in a coordinated search pattern, professional, deliberate. He shifted his view and caught sight of their target, a flash of spotted gold disappearing behind rocks, moving with the desperate, uneven gait of an injured animal. The Silent One began to pace frantically, moving between Tom and the door, making a sound Tom had never heard from him, a distressed chirping that bordered on anguish. Tom's mind raced through the implications. The cheetahs hadn't appeared in Tuscany by accident. They'd escaped from somewhere, and these men were hunting them down. He moved to his radio, an old emergency scanner he'd kept from his ranger days, and tuned to the frequency most hunters used in the region. After a moment of static, voices crackled through. Lost her again. Heading northeast toward that American's property. Rich bastard wants his investment back. Said dead or alive. But alive brings triple the pay. How much are we talking? 50,000 euros for the breeding pair, 20 for the cub. Tom's blood went cold. These weren't poachers in the traditional sense. They were hired retrievers. Someone owned these cheetahs, or thought they did, and wanted them back badly enough to pay obscene money and violate every wildlife protection law on the books. The radio crackled again. The male's deaf and half-blind. Easy target. But the female, she's smart. And she's protecting territory she knows we're close to the cub. Tom looked at the Silent One, at the scars, the torn ear, the milky eye, then at Ember, innocent and sleeping. The truth assembled itself like a nightmare. The Silent One's mate, Ember's mother, was out there, injured, running, drawing the hunters away from her baby and the deaf, vulnerable male who couldn't survive a hunt. She was sacrificing herself. The radio continued. If we can't find her in the next hour, we torch the perimeter. She'll either run into the open or cook. Either way, job's done. Tom stood frozen in his kitchen, Surrounded by the evidence of his choices, medical supplies scattered across the table, maps marked with escape routes, a sleeping cub who trusted him completely. He could stay. Keep Ember and the Silent One safe. Lock the doors. Call the authorities in the morning. The mother cheetah was likely already dying from her wounds. Nothing he could do would change that. Or, the Silent One looked at him with that one good eye and the same look he'd given Tom 12 years ago in Kenya. The same look he'd given when he pushed Ember toward Tom's door 6 days ago. A look that said, I know what you are. I know you don't abandon those who need you. Tom closed his eyes and saw Daniel in that hospital bed, small and brave and fighting until the very end. Heard his son's last coherent words, Dad, don't let them give up on me. Tom hadn't been able to save Daniel, but he could save one more life tonight. He opened his gun cabinet and, for the first time in 20 years, loaded his shotgun. Your mate is out there, Tom said to the Silent One, and I'm not letting her die alone. He grabbed a heavy jacket, a flashlight, and his old field medical kit. The Silent One tried to follow. Tom blocked the door. No, you stay. Protect your daughter. That's your job. He pointed at Ember. Protect her. That's all you can do now. The cheetah resisted, pushing against Tom's leg. Tom knelt and placed both hands on the scarred head. This is mine to do. Trust me like you did before. Please. The Silent One looked at him for a long moment, then slowly backed away and positioned himself between the door and Ember. Tom stepped into the night. The Tuscan hills were dark under a moonless sky. Tom moved through the olive grove and into the forest, following the sounds of the hunt. His knees protested. His back ached. At 67, he had no business chasing armed men through wilderness, but his hands were steady and his purpose was clear. He tracked them by their flashlights and their careless noise. These were men who expected no resistance, who operated with the confidence of people who'd never faced consequences. Tom found her in a ravine, a steep-sided gully thick with brambles and rock. She was wedged between two boulders. Her breathing labored, blood dark on her spotted coat. A gunshot wound to her left flank, not immediately fatal, but bleeding freely. She saw Tom and tried to snarl, but the sound came out as a weak hiss. Easy, girl. Easy now. The flashlight beams were getting closer. Tom could hear them. She went down here. Can't have gone far with that wound. Tom stepped into the clearing between the ravine and the approaching hunters. Shotgun raised. 3 men emerged from the trees. They stopped when they saw him. The leader, American accent. Expensive hunting gear, laughed. Old man, you're lost. This doesn't concern you. That animal concerns me. Tom kept the shotgun level. And you're hunting on protected land. We're retrieving stolen property. Big difference. She's not property. She's worth 50,000 euros to her owner. What's she worth to you? Your life. The man gestured to his companions, who began to spread out, flanking Tom. Tom's finger moved to the trigger. I'm a veterinarian. I don't shoot living things, but I'll make an exception for men who hunt injured mothers. Big words for someone outgunned 3-1. Tom smiled, though his heart was hammering. I grew up in Montana. You're standing in a geological dead end with loose shale on 3 sides. You really want to test how good my aim is. For a moment, no one moved. Then Tom fired straight up into the air. The sound was massive in the enclosed space, echoing off rock walls. The report triggered exactly what Tom had gambled on. The unstable shale above them began to shift. Run! The leader shouted. The 3 men scattered as rocks began cascading down the ravine walls, not a massive avalanche, but enough loose stone to make the position untenable and dangerous. In the chaos and dust, Tom moved back to the injured cheetah. She was dying. He could see it in her eyes, in the way her breathing had become shallow and irregular. The blood loss was too severe. Even with immediate surgical intervention, her chances would have been minimal. Tom knelt beside her, set down his shotgun, and placed his hand gently on her head. She didn't pull away. Her one visible eye focused on him, and Tom felt that same shock of recognition he'd felt with the Silent One. This cheetah knew him, had been there. Somehow, in that same facility in Kenya where he'd worked, another rescued cub, another impossible memory. "He found me," Tom whispered. "Your mate. He brought your daughter to me. She's safe. She's healing. I promise you, I swear to you, she'll grow up wild and free." The cheetah's breathing eased slightly. Tom saw understanding in her eyes, not human understanding, but something deeper. The knowledge that her sacrifice had worked. Her baby was safe. She placed her paw on Tom's hand, the gesture deliberate and unmistakable. Tom stayed with her as her breathing slowed, as the light in her eye dimmed. He stayed until the last breath left her body peaceful, trusting. Her duty finally done. Tom sat in the darkness with his hand on her cooling body and understood what the Silent One had known all along. Some missions require everything you have. Some loves demand the ultimate price. And the greatest act of courage isn't surviving. It's making sure those you love survive after you're gone. September 24th, dawn. Tom returned as the first light touched the Tuscan hills. He was covered in mud and dried blood that wasn't his clothes torn from brambles. Exhaustion carved into every line of his face. He'd walked back slowly, carrying the weight of what he'd witnessed, dreading what he had to do next. The Silent One was waiting at the door. The cheetah knew immediately. Tom saw it in the way his body went rigid, in how his nose lifted to catch the scent of death clinging to Tom's jacket. The Silent One stepped forward, pressed his face to Tom's hands, inhaled deeply, then made a sound Tom had never heard, a keening chirp that was almost human in its grief. "I'm sorry," Tom whispered. "I stayed with her." She knew Ember was safe. She went peacefully. The Silent One didn't move with violence or rage. Instead, a profound stillness settled over him, the terrible quiet of someone whose world has just ended, but whose body hasn't caught up yet. Ember stirred from her sleeping spot and padded over, sensing something wrong. She nuzzled against her father's leg, confused by the change in him. The Silent One touched his nose to his daughter's head, gentle and heartbreaking, then moved to the corner of the room and lay down with his back to them both. Tom understood that posture. He'd done the same thing the day after Ellie's funeral, turned his face to the wall and wished for the world to disappear. He cleaned himself up, made coffee he didn't drink, and sat vigil with two cheetahs who had lost their mother and mate. Understanding exactly how that particular darkness felt, they stayed that way for hours, three beings bound by loss, sitting in shared silence because there were no words in any language that could make it better. Morning, 9:15 a.m. The sound of vehicles shattered the quiet. Tom looked out the window and felt his heart sink. A convoy, two carabinieri vehicles. One truck marked with the Italian Wildlife Protection Agency, and Marco Bellini's pickup bringing up the rear. He'd known this was coming. The hunters had surely reported the incident. The authorities would have been called. But Tom had hoped for more time. The knock on the door was firm and official. Tom opened it to find Captain Ricci of the Carabinieri, 50-something. Steel-gray hair, eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed, but not so much that they'd lost all compassion. "Dr. Thomas Whitmore." "Yes." "I'm Captain Ricci. These are officers from the Wildlife Protection Agency. We've received reports that you're harboring illegally imported exotic animals, specifically cheetahs that escaped from a private collector's facility near Florence." Tom stepped aside. "They're inside. A male and a cub. The male is deaf and partially blind. The cub nearly died 6 days ago. I performed emergency surgery to save her life." Ricci entered, his officers following. They stopped when they saw the Silent One and Ember. "Madonna," one of the younger officers breathed. Marco pushed his way in, triumphant. "You see, I told you. Wild beasts, dangerous animals. And this man? Marco, please." Ricci's voice carried quiet authority. "Let me handle this." He approached the cheetahs carefully. The Silent One didn't react, didn't even raise his head. Ember pressed closer to her father, frightened by the strangers. Ricci turned to Tom. You're aware that keeping exotic wildlife without proper permits is illegal in Italy. I'm aware. And you're aware that these animals were reported stolen from a licensed facility. A facility that was keeping them in cages barely large enough to turn around, that hired armed men to hunt down an injured female and threatened to burn a forest to retrieve them. That's not a sanctuary. Captain, that's a prison. Perhaps, but the law is clear. These animals must be confiscated and placed in proper care. Proper care? Tom's voice rose. You mean transferred to another facility, another cage. The male crossed 4,000 miles to find me because I saved his life 12 years ago in Kenya. He trusted me enough to bring his dying daughter, and my reward is to send them both to captivity. Ricci's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Dr. Whitmore, I understand your emotional investment, but I have a legal obligation. They'll die in a cage. The male is already dying. What? Tom gestured to the silent one. Look at him. Really look. He's not eating, not drinking. His mate was killed last night by those hunters. He's given up. One of the wildlife officers knelt near the silent one, examining him from a safe distance. Dr. Whitmore is correct. The animal shows signs of severe stress and depression, refusing food and water. In cheetahs, this can be fatal within days. Marco stepped forward. All the more reason to remove them to professional care. Professional care won't save him from grief. Tom said quietly. I'm a veterinarian. I know the difference between a medical condition and a broken heart. You can't cure that with medication or captivity. Ricci was silent for a long moment, studying Tom with those assessing eyes. Finally, you said you performed surgery on the cub. Yes, she had an obstruction in her throat, would have died without intervention. And you have veterinary credentials, 20 years with the Kenya Wildlife Service. I can provide documentation. Ricci exchanged glances with the senior wildlife officer, some unspoken communication passing between them. Here's what I can offer, Ricci said. You have 24 hours, 1 day to say your goodbyes and prepare them for transport. After that, they must be surrendered to the Wildlife Protection Agency for proper placement. Captain, you can't seriously, Marco began. I can and I am. Ricci's voice hardened. This man violated the law, yes, but he also saved an animal's life while licensed facilities were hiring mercenaries to hunt them. I'll take his oath that the cheetahs pose no danger for the next 24 hours. After that, Dr. Whitmore, I must do my duty. Tom looked at the silent one, at Ember, at the impossible choice before him. 24 hours, 1 day, then cages, facilities, the slow death of wild things kept behind bars. Thank you, Captain, Tom said quietly, after they left. Marco lingering at the door with a final warning glare. Tom sat on the floor beside the silent one and Ember. He'd won them 1 more day, 1 more night. But tomorrow, he'd lose them anyway, not to death, but to something worse. To bureaucracy and legality and the kind of living death that came from being caged when you were born to run. Tom began making preparations. If he only had 24 hours, he needed to make a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He could surrender them to the authorities as promised, or he could do what the silent one had done, cross impossible distances, break every rule, and trust that love was sometimes worth the price of everything. That evening, Tom noticed the silent one's condition worsening. The cheetah wouldn't touch food or water. His breathing had become shallow. His body temperature was dropping. Tom examined him and found nothing physically wrong, no infection, no injury beyond the old scars. But he'd seen this before in animals who'd lost their mates. In humans, too. Ellie had called it dying of a broken heart, when Tom had scoffed at the unscientific terminology. But standing in his kitchen, watching a magnificent animal slowly shut down from grief, Tom understood it was real. He could save bodies. He'd proven that with Ember, with hundreds of animals over decades of practice. But hearts broken by loss so profound that living felt like betrayal. Medicine had no answer for that. Tom wrapped a blanket around the silent one, sat beside him, and realized they were the same two beings who'd lost everything, going through motions of survival without remembering why. The difference was the silent one had the courage to stop pretending, and Tom was too much of a coward to join him. September 24th, evening. Tom spread maps across his kitchen table, studying routes to protected wilderness areas in the Apennines. He had until dawn before Captain Ricci returned. 12 hours to decide between surrender and rebellion. The legal choice was clear: hand them over. Trust the system. Believe that facilities designed for exotic wildlife would provide adequate care. Ember was young enough to adapt. The silent one would be managed. The other choice meant breaking his word to a police captain, violating international wildlife laws, and potentially facing criminal charges. It meant loading 2 cheetahs into his truck in the dead of night and driving to some remote mountain region where he'd release them and pray they survived. Neither option felt like winning. Tom prepared supplies anyway: dried meat, medical kit, water containers, blankets. If he was going to make a run for it, he needed to be ready. He studied topographical maps, marked potential release sites, calculated drive times. All the while, the silent one lay motionless in the corner. Tom checked on him every 30 minutes, each time. The cheetah's condition had deteriorated further. His breathing was shallow and irregular. His nose was dry. His eye had lost its focus. "You need to eat something," Tom said, offering freshly cut rabbit. "Please." The silent one didn't even look at the food. Ember tried too, pushing meat toward her father with her small paws, making confused, chirping sounds. The silent one touched his nose to her head gently, but wouldn't eat. Tom recognized the pattern. He'd seen it in elephants who'd lost their herd members, in wolves separated from their packs, in dolphins who stopped swimming after their companions died. The scientific community debated whether animals experienced grief the way humans did, but Tom had never doubted it. Grief was universal. It crossed species like a plague, and the silent one was dying from it. Tom tried everything he knew: subcutaneous fluids, appetite stimulants, warmth, comfort. Nothing worked. The cheetah's body was shutting down, not from physical illness, but from a broken will to continue. "Don't do this," Tom whispered, sitting beside the dying animal. "She needs you. Ember needs her father." The silent one's eye found Tom's face, and in that look, Tom saw something that made his throat close: understanding, agreement, and profound, gentle disagreement. As evening deepened into night, Tom gave up on the medical interventions and simply sat with the silent one and Ember. He made a final meal: rabbit stew that the silent one wouldn't touch, and tried to prepare himself for the inevitable. Around 10 p.m., Tom began talking, not to save the silent one's life, but to bear witness to it. "You know what it's like, don't you?" Tom said quietly. "To lose everything that mattered. Your mate is gone. You're deaf and half blind. You fought for so long, and you're tired." The silent one's breathing remained shallow but steady, listening with his body if not his ears. "I stopped living the day Ellie died," Tom continued. 3 years ago. I've just been here, taking up space, going through motions. I buried a medal under a tree and called it grief. I locked myself away and called it healing." Tom looked at Ember, who had fallen asleep against her father's side. "You crossed a continent for your daughter. 4,000 miles. Through territories that should have killed you, past obstacles that should have been impossible. You remembered one kind act from 12 years ago and bet everything on it." He paused, the weight of that truth settling over him. "What have I done? I survived. That's it. I breathed and ate and watched days pass. I didn't live. I didn't fight. I just endured." The silent one lifted his head slightly, looking directly at Tom with his one good eye. In that moment, Tom saw complete understanding pass between them, not human to animal, but soul to soul. Two beings who had loved deeply, lost everything, and reached different conclusions about what came next. Then, the Silent One did something that shattered Tom completely. The cheetah slowly, painfully, stood. His legs trembled with the effort. Ember stirred but didn't wake. The Silent One walked to the corner where Tom had placed Daniel's medal on a small shelf beside a photograph of Ellie. He took the medal gently in his mouth, carried it back, and dropped it in Tom's lap. Tom stared at the tarnished silver, at the engraving he knew by heart. Then the Silent One did something even more impossible. He lay down and placed his head in Tom's lap, exactly the position he'd taken 12 years ago in Kenya after Tom had saved his leg. The position of ultimate trust, of vulnerability, of a wounded creature seeking comfort from the only human who'd ever shown him kindness. But this time, he wasn't wounded physically. He was asking permission to rest, finally, completely. Tom's hands shook as he placed them on the scarred head. Why come all this way just to... Then he saw it. The Silent One's other paw was wrapped protectively around Ember. Even now, even dying, his body formed a barrier between his daughter and the world. The truth hit Tom like a physical blow. The Silent One hadn't come to be healed. He'd come to transfer guardianship. The mother had drawn the hunters away, sacrificing herself so Ember and the Silent One could escape. But the Silent One, deaf, partially blind, exhausted, knew he couldn't protect Ember alone, couldn't teach her to hunt, couldn't keep her safe until she was old enough to survive. So he'd made an impossible journey to find the one human who'd proven trustworthy, the one who'd saved him when he was vulnerable, the one who understood that wild things deserved to stay wild. "You're asking me to be her father," Tom whispered. The Silent One's response was a deep rumble from his chest, a sound cheetahs made rarely, reserved for moments of profound communication. Not quite a purr, not quite a growl. Something uniquely their own. It meant, yes, please, I can't anymore. But you can. Tom's vision blurred with tears. If I promise, if I swear I'll raise her, teach her everything she needs, and release her when she's ready. Will you rest? The Silent One made the sound again. Longer this time. Peaceful. Tom understood what was being asked. What was being offered. The Silent One wasn't dying of grief alone, he was dying of relief. Finally, someone to trust with his most precious treasure. Finally, he could stop fighting. And in giving Tom that responsibility, that purpose, the Silent One was giving him something else, a reason to live. I promise, Tom said, his voice breaking. I'll teach her to hunt, to run, to be everything she was meant to be. And when she's ready, when she's truly ready, I'll take her home, to Kenya, to the wild. I swear it. The rumble came one more time, softer now, satisfied. Tom stayed awake through the night, holding the Silent One's head, feeling the breathing gradually slow. Ember woke once, sensed what was happening, and pressed herself against her father for the last time. Tom talked to them both, telling stories about Daniel. He was so brave, Tom said softly. Braver than I ever was. He was 8 years old and facing death, and he never complained. Never asked why me. He just kept fighting, kept smiling, kept telling jokes to make the nurses laugh. The Silent One's breathing became more labored. I'm sorry I forgot how to be that brave, how to fight for something beyond just surviving. You reminded me. You and Ember. Tom stroked the scarred head gently. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for remembering me. Thank you for showing me that love doesn't end when someone dies, it just changes form. It becomes responsibility, purpose, legacy. Around 4 a.m., Tom felt the change. The Silent One's breathing had reached that final rhythm, slow, shallow, increasingly spaced. Ember sensed it too. She made a small, sad chirping sound and licked her father's face. The Silent One's eye focused on Tom one last time. In that look was everything gratitude, trust, release. and a father's desperate hope that his choice was right. At 4:47 a.m., the Silent One took his last breath. His head remained in Tom's lap, peaceful. His paw stayed wrapped around Ember. He died the way he'd lived, protecting his daughter to the very end. Tom sat in the pre-dawn darkness, holding a cheetah who'd crossed continents to find him, and finally understood. The Silent One had never been dying of grief. He'd been dying of completion. His mission was finished. His daughter was safe. The human he'd chosen had made a promise. He could finally rest. Ember curled against her father's still body, not understanding death but understanding absence. Tom wrapped his arms around both of them and wept, not just for the Silent One, not just for Daniel and Ellie, but for every loss, every goodbye, every impossible choice that love demanded. And somewhere in that grief, Tom felt something else, the first stirring of purpose in 3 years. He had a promise to keep, a daughter to raise, a wild thing to teach how to be wild. The Silent One hadn't come to be saved. He'd come to save Tom, and it had worked. As dawn broke over the Tuscan hills, Tom gently moved the Silent One's body, wrapped him in Ellie's favorite blanket, and began to dig a grave under the olive tree where her ashes rested. 2 loves buried in the same earth, 2 beings who'd trusted him with their final moments. Ember watched from the doorway, confused and grieving. Tom looked at her and saw his future months of teaching, years of responsibility, the eventual heartbreak of letting her go, but also purpose, connection, the chance to honor every promise he'd ever made and every promise made to him. "Come here, little one," Tom said softly. Ember approached cautiously. Tom knelt and held her close. "Your father gave you to me, and I won't let him down. I won't let you down. We're going to do this right." Captain Ricci would arrive in a few hours expecting surrender. Instead, he'd find a man who'd finally remembered what it meant to fight for something worth fighting for. Tom had 1 day before the authorities returned. He'd need a miracle, or he'd need Father Giuseppe's phone number and the courage to ask for help from a village that had never quite accepted him. Either way, he wasn't giving up Ember. The Silent One had trusted him, and Tom Whitmore was done breaking promises. September 25th. Dawn. Tom finished burying the Silent One as Captain Ricci's convoy arrived. He'd worked through the early morning hours, digging the grave beside Ellie's olive tree, wrapping the cheetah's body in her favorite blanket, the blue one with yellow flowers she'd bought at a market in Florence. 2 beings who'd trusted him, buried in the same earth, 2 loves that had changed everything. Ember sat vigil beside the fresh mound, confused and grieving, making small chirping sounds that tore at Tom's heart. Tom was filthy, exhausted, his hands blistered from the shovel, but his eyes were clear when he stood to face Ricci. The captain approached slowly, taking in the scene: the grave, the grieving cub, the old man who looked like he'd fought a war overnight. "Dr. Whitmore," Ricci said quietly. "I'm sorry. The male died at 4:47 this morning. Grief, I think, or completion. Maybe both." Tom's voice was steady. "Which is why I can't let you take Ember." "Dr. Whitmore." "No." Tom stepped between Ricci and the cub. "Her father crossed 4,000 miles to bring her to me. Her mother died drawing hunters away so she could survive. The male gave his life ensuring she'd have a guardian. I made him a promise, Captain, and I won't break it." Marco pushed forward from the group. "You see, he admits he'll violate the law. Arrest him." "Marco, please," Ricci said, but his eyes never left Tom's face. "Dr. Whitmore, I understand your emotional state, but the law is clear. The cub must be surrendered to proper authorities for placement in an accredited facility. She'll die in a cage. She'll receive professional care. She'll receive captivity. There's a difference." Tom's hands clenched. "I'm a licensed veterinarian with 20 years of field experience. I can provide everything she needs. I can teach her to hunt, to survive, to be wild, and when she's ready, I'll take her home, to Kenya, where she belongs. That's not your decision to make. Her father made it my decision. With his dying breath, he entrusted her to me. Animals can't make legal contracts. Dr. Whitmore, but they can make moral ones. And I'll be damned if I dishonor his trust by handing her over to another cage. The standoff held for a long moment, Tom exhausted but immovable. Richie caught between duty and something that looked like understanding. Then a new voice spoke from behind the convoy. Captain, perhaps there is another way. Father Giuseppe walked up the path, moving with the careful deliberation of his 74 years. In his hand was a folder. Father. Richie turned, surprised. I took the liberty of making some calls last night. Giuseppe handed the folder to Richie, to WWF Italia, and to the Kenya Wildlife Service. Richie opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. His eyebrows rose. What is this? Marco demanded. Giuseppe addressed Tom directly. The female's DNA was registered when she was captured by the private facility. She's from a protected Kenyan bloodline, part of a breeding program that was stolen and sold on the black market 3 years ago. Her existence in Italy is itself a crime. Tom's heart began to race. What are you saying? WWF Italia has been working with Kenyan authorities to recover stolen wildlife. This cub qualifies. Giuseppe gestured to the documents. If you agree to act as a licensed rehabilitation specialist, which you are qualified to do, Ember can remain in your care until she's mature enough for release. 18 to 24 months. And then? Tom asked, barely breathing. Then you accompany her back to Kenya, to the Masai Mara Reserve where her parents originated. You release her properly, in her native habitat, with full documentation and support from the Kenya Wildlife Service. Tom stared at the old priest. How did you? I have contacts. Giuseppe's eyes held quiet warmth. And I remember what you did in Kenya before you came here. You think small villages don't talk to other small villages, even across continents. Richie studied the documents carefully. This appears legitimate. Dr. Whitmore's credentials check out. The cub's lineage is documented. If he agrees to the terms, including return to Kenya for proper release, this falls under wildlife rehabilitation and repatriation protocols. This is absurd, Marco exploded. You're going to let him keep a dangerous wild animal for 2 years based on paperwork. I'm going to follow international wildlife law, Richie said firmly, which prioritizes proper rehabilitation and repatriation over convenience. He turned to Tom. But there are conditions: monthly inspections, proper enclosure and safety measures, documentation of the cub's progress, and you must accept that in 2 years maximum, she returns to Kenya. Tom looked at Ember, who had moved closer to him during the conversation, pressing against his leg for comfort. 2 years. 2 years to raise her, teach her, prepare her. Then the heartbreak of letting her go. But it was more than he dared hope for, more than the Silent One could have asked. I accept, Tom said. All of it. Marco stormed back to his truck, muttering about Americans and foolish priests and the world going mad. Father Giuseppe smiled gently. Come by the church this week, Thomas. We'll need to arrange proper permits. And perhaps you might stay for coffee after. It was an invitation, an opening. The first real one Tom had received from the village in 3 years. I'd like that, Father. Thank you. After they left, Tom sat beside the grave with Ember curled in his lap and allowed himself to feel something he'd forgotten: hope. Month 1, October. Tom converted the old barn into proper cheetah habitat, secure fencing, climbing structures, space to run. The wildlife officers inspected and approved. Ember thrived, doubling her weight within weeks. She was mischievous, stealing Tom's socks and hiding them in impossible places. She learned to ambush him from behind furniture. She chirped excitedly whenever he prepared her meals. Tom relearned joy through her antics. The village children began appearing at the fence, keeping respectful distance, watching in wonder. Tom started giving informal education sessions about cheetahs, about conservation, about why wild things needed to stay wild even while being raised by humans. Father Giuseppe visited weekly, ostensibly to check on permits but really to share wine and conversation. Tom talked more in October than he had in the previous 3 years combined. Month 2 to 3, November-December. Tom began teaching Ember to hunt using live prey in the enclosed training area. Rabbits, birds, small game. She was clumsy at first, pouncing too early, misjudging distances, losing patience. Your father would be proud of you trying, Tom told her after a particularly comical failed attempt where she face-planted into a mud puddle. Success isn't the point. The courage to keep trying is. He started keeping a journal, letter to the silent one, day 47. She caught her first rabbit today. Didn't know what to do with it afterward. But the instinct is there. You'd have been so proud. The first snow came to Tuscany in early December. Ember had never seen snow. She went absolutely wild leaping, sliding, catching snowflakes, rolling in drifts. Tom laughed until his sides hurt and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that. Ellie would have loved this, he thought. Daniel would have wanted to play in the snow with Ember. The grief was still there, but it had changed shape less like drowning, more like carrying something precious. Month 4, January. Ember was 6 months old now, adolescent and gangly, all legs and spots and growing confidence. She was faster than Tom could track with his eyes. Her hunting success rate had climbed to 60%. She started showing restlessness climbing the highest points of her enclosure, watching the horizon, making sounds Tom recognized as the call of something wild recognizing its true nature. Tom received official notification from Kenya Wildlife Service release date set for March 15th, 4 months away. He began his own preparations, arranging to close up the farmhouse, saying goodbye to a place that had been both sanctuary and prison. He spent hours at Ellie's grave, talking to her. I'm going back, he told the olive tree, to Kenya, to finish what the Silent One started. I think you'd want me to do this. I think Daniel would too. One afternoon, Marco's pickup appeared at the farm. Tom tensed, expecting another confrontation. Instead, Marco got out carrying lumber. My grandson won't stop asking about the leopard, Marco said gruffly, not meeting Tom's eyes. Cheetah, whatever. He wants to see her before you leave. Marco, I was wrong. About you. About her. Marco finally looked up. My grandson is 8. Same age your son was when... I can't imagine. And you're still finding ways to care for things. Still finding reasons to keep going. He held out his hand. Let me help you build the transport crate. For when you leave. Tom shook his hand, throat tight. Thank you. They worked together for the next week, building a proper travel crate to airline specifications. Marco brought his grandson Shy, wide-eyed, clutching a drawing of a cheetah he'd made at school. Ember approached the fence, curious. The boy gasped in wonder. She's beautiful, he whispered. She is, Tom agreed. And soon, she'll be free. Month 5 to 6, February-March. Tom packed up 3 years of Italian life into boxes. The farmhouse slowly emptied. Ember, now 9 months old, was magnificent, lean, powerful. Every inch the predator she was meant to be. She knew something was changing, became anxious, pacing, watching Tom constantly. We're going home, Tom told her during their evening sessions. Your father's home, where you belong, where you'll finally understand what you're meant to be. The final week arrived too fast. The village held a small gathering in the church square, awkward, sincere, very Italian. Children presented drawings. Maria from the pharmacy brought food. Even Marco gave a speech about Americans and cheetahs and learning when you're wrong. Father Giuseppe blessed Ember. Go with grace, little one. Remember the man who remembered you, and teach others that trust is the bridge between species. Tom stood before the villagers who'd finally accepted him just as he was leaving, and felt the bittersweet ache of belonging and goodbye happening simultaneously. March 15th, Masai Mara Reserve. Kenya. The savannah stretched endless and golden under the African sun. Tom stood at the release site, the same region where he'd saved the Silent One 12 years ago, and felt the weight of the journey complete itself. Ember was in the transport crate, agitated and ready. The release team surrounded him, rangers, wildlife veterinarians, camera crews documenting for conservation records. Tom spent the final night in a tent beside Ember's crate. She paced restlessly, smelling the air, ancestral memory awakening in her blood. "Tomorrow," Tom whispered. "Tomorrow you run." At dawn, they opened the crate in the vast grassland. Ember stepped out slowly, overwhelmed. Space she'd never imagined, horizon that went forever, the scent of 1,000 wild things calling her home. She didn't run immediately. Instead, she turned back to Tom. He knelt, and she approached this 9-month-old cheetah who'd been dying when he first held her, now powerful and ready. Ember pressed her head to Tom's chest, exactly where the Silent One had placed his paw that final night. A cheetah's version of, "I remember. I understand. Thank you." Then she ran. Full sprint into golden grass, morning sun catching her spots. Powerful and free, and finally herself. Tom watched until she was a dot on the horizon. Whispered words meant for the Silent One. Wherever he was, "I kept my promise. She's home. She's free. And I'm going to be okay." 3 months later, June. Tom had stayed in Kenya, working with the Wildlife Service again, living in a small cabin on the reserve border, finding purpose in the work he'd abandoned years ago. One morning, the research team called him urgently to view camera trap footage. The screen showed Ember, now a year old, running with a coalition of 3 male cheetahs. She'd integrated into the wild population seamlessly. But remarkably, the footage showed her teaching them something: how to avoid human traps, how to use the medical clearing area where rangers could help injured animals, how to distinguish between threats and help. "We've never seen this behavior before," the wildlife veterinarian said in wonder. "She's teaching them to trust certain humans, to seek help when injured. It's extraordinary." Tom felt his throat tighten. The Silent One's legacy passed through Ember, spreading through the wild population like hope itself. That evening, Tom sat beside the Mara River at sunset. He carried a photograph: Tom, Ellie, and Daniel from 20 years ago, all smiling in the Kenyan sun. "I miss you both," he said quietly. "Every day. But I think I finally understand. Daniel fought to live. The Silent One fought to save his daughter. Ellie fought to show me beauty even when everything hurt." He paused, watching the water flow. "And I'm fighting now, not to survive, but to live, to matter, to honor every promise made to me and every promise I've made. Love doesn't end when someone dies, it just changes form. It becomes legacy, purpose, connection." Movement caught his eye across the river. A cheetah stood on the opposite bank, watching him. Tom couldn't tell if it was Ember or another. It didn't matter. He raised his hand in salute. The cheetah chirped a sound like birdsong, like greeting, like recognition, then vanished into the tall grass. Tom smiled, not the broken smile of a man surviving, but the whole smile of a man who'd found his way back. In his pocket were 2 relics: Daniel's bravest heart medal and a single cheetah whisker Ember had left behind. 2 kinds of courage, both teaching the same lesson. The bravest thing isn't holding on, it's letting go with love, trusting that those you've raised will find their way, just as he finally had. Tom stood, stretched his aging back, and turned toward the cabin. Tomorrow he'd check camera traps. Next week, a new injured cub would arrive needing rehabilitation. Next month, another release. The work continued. The purpose remained. And somewhere in the golden grasslands, a cheetah who'd crossed continents in her father's memory taught her companions that some humans were worth trusting, that some promises were worth keeping, that love, real love, was always worth the impossible journey. Tom walked home as the African sunset painted the sky in colors Ellie had loved, carrying the weight of his losses like treasures instead of burdens. The Silent One had been right. Sometimes you had to cross impossible distances to find what you were meant to protect. And sometimes what you saved ended up saving you. The end. I learned something in those Tuscan hills that I want to share with you. For 3 years, I thought grief meant shutting down, building walls, surviving but not living. I buried my son's medal and called it closure. I existed in that farmhouse like a ghost haunting his own life. Then a deaf cheetah crossed 4,000 miles to remind me what family really means. Family isn't just blood. It's trust given when trust is impossible. It's promises kept even when keeping them costs everything. It's recognizing that we're all human and animal alike, just trying to protect what we love before time runs out. The Silent One could have died anywhere, but he chose to die in my arms, knowing I'd honor what mattered most to him. That's not instinct. That's faith. And Ember taught me that letting go isn't abandonment. It's the highest form of love. Watching her run into that golden grassland broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. We spend so much time afraid of loss that we forget to celebrate what we still have. The connections that found us, the second chances we didn't expect. Gratitude isn't about what we keep. It's about what we're brave enough to release with love. That's what I learned from a cheetah who remembered kindness across continents and decades, and I'll carry that lesson home.